Well, we're getting closer, and in this segment, I decided to have a special, separate segment for just making some improvements to the application, and also to talk about the landscape for deploying. So we're not going to deploy in this video, but we are going to look at some of the issues that come up with deployment. So if we're making an application for profit or fame, we want as many people to use it as possible. So when we make an application, we specify the minimum SDK that the application can run on, and how popular is that, and who does that eliminate? Well, on the Android website under resources, there's this graph that is updated really quite frequently that shows you, of all of the Android device carriers, what operating system are they using. So the very old ones and the very new ones as of today are this very small part of the pie. So if we look at this part of the graph, where you get more than 90% of the users, I guess that's something around 90%, the minimum SDK would have to be 2.1, Android 2.1, which is API level 7. So it depends on how much of a pain it is for you to go back and make your application run in 2.1. How important is it for you to lose this percentage of the market, which is 17%. So if your minimum SDK was level 8, you would have an application that could run on all of these. So it's really 2.2, which is about 60%, and 2.3.3, which is 17. So you would have 77% of the market if you went to 2.2, and about 95% of the market if you went to 2.1. So that's a consideration, and you have to play around a little bit and see if you started out using a version that's higher, then you gained something. You gained the only using the newer stuff that's somewhat easier to use in the API, and you lost something as well. And you might be saying, well, we should have started talking about all this stuff at the beginning, but it's really kind of boring stuff, and I wanted us to just jump in and start doing things. And going back and working your way out, especially when you're just getting started in this, is not a bad place to be. When you start your next application, you would probably be more comfortable thinking about these issues in the beginning. So we have that issue, the min SDK, and we have all of these issues with the specific devices. So a hardware manufacturer, there's a ton of them making Android devices. All of these different companies that are part of the Open Handset Alliance, and they're making devices that have different screens sizes, physical sizes, and different pixel density, different numbers of pixels, and the orientation of the screen is not treated consistently. So there's another kind of a survey of what's going on with the device carriers, and so they've divided it up into the screen size is small, normal, large, and extra large. So the tablets are extra large, and then the small are the really small phones. There's not so many of those, so most of them are normal. You get 75, let's see, 85, 92, 93% of the devices are considered to be normal size. And then this is called the density, the low, medium, high, and extra high density, which is how big are the pixels on the screen. And when you're testing your application, you also use this to decide who is your target market and who are you going to just say, no, this application can't or isn't worth being customized so that it will run on those unusual devices, as well as the main target market. So this is a little bit difficult. It's one of my least favorite parts of developing apps in Android, that you have to write the application and then test it in a whole bunch of different ways and then start tweaking it to make sure that it does what you want it to do on all of these different devices. But it is what it is, and they give you, as of July 1st, 2011, during a 7-day period, this is what we get. Oh, the other thing that we need to do is to create application icons. So their instructions, the Android instructions for making an application icon, are really very specific, and we will build an icon for our bowling scores application, and that will give you an idea of what's involved in building an icon that meets their recommendation and their specification. Okay, so what are we going to do next? We're going to tweak the GUI a little bit. We're going to make the application icon. This also includes icons that are used for the pop-up dialogues and different application icons depending on the density of the device that the application is running on. And then we have to test it on several virtual devices and make adjustments there if necessary, and test it on physical devices. Then we'll have this conversation about whether we're done and what is the definition of done. This is harder than you would think, because you could say that if we wrote down exactly what we wanted the application to do in all ways, then we could just check back with that and see if we've done everything. But that's not how applications work. They tend to evolve while you're doing them, and you think of other things, and when you see it you say, well, I don't like that, so the original plan isn't what we should have really been doing. And this is kind of the difference between agile development and highly planned development. If you aren't agile in the development, then you won't come out with the best product. But if you're too agile, you'll never come out with a product, because you'll always be saying, well, I'm not done yet, I could add this, I'm not done yet, I could make this a little bit better. So we have to think about things that could be in the application and decide whether we need to do those to declare done. So I just thought of a few. Instead of just deleting our record of bowling scores, maybe we would want to change one of them. Is that really necessary? I'm not sure. This is something that I would like to have. Email the scores to me, or email them to that address that you email stuff that automatically posts them on Facebook. So I think that one would add a lot to the application. I don't know exactly how to do that right now, so I'm going to kind of ignore it. We didn't use the menu button, which is on all Android devices, either as a soft button or a physical hard button. And I thought it would be a nice feature to, if your bowling season is done, have one button that removes all of the data to start a new season. And that would keep you from saying, remove this one, remove this one, remove this one. Or if you've got too many of them in there, somebody would decide, well, it's time to uninstall the app and reinstall it so that the database will get wiped out. Maybe a warning if the data is already entered. So if you have specific scores on a specific day, if that's already in the database, then tell the user that. And here's the big test. Show it to others and see what happens. And maybe that one should be up here. So I can tell you what I did with the bowling app. I installed it on my Samsung tablet, and it looked very nice, and I was quite pleased with it, and it was quite functional. So I gave it to someone else, and the result was disastrous. So a whole bunch of things that happened have resulted in how I would change the user interface. So where's our application? Let's see if we can look at it. Well, the other thing that we would have to do is to deploy to the App Store. And I've looked at how to do that, and I've decided that that should be in a separate video. It's not that hard, but it's probably separate from this subject. So let's go and look at the application that we have as of right now. So I gave this to a friend of mine on a tablet, running on a tablet, and the first thing that happened was that these light colored letters didn't show up too well, and he thought it was maybe the reflection of the sun on the screen that he couldn't see them very well. They weren't jumping out, so he tipped the device so that it would be away from the window, and that meant that the application started rotating around. Because we can't turn the computer screen and have it recognize that it's not in the same orientation. I never really noticed this before. But you can shift the emulator, the orientation of the emulator, if you hold Control F11. And so if you had physically turned the device, this is what the application would do. And if you keep turning the device, the application will keep flipping around, and sometimes the flipping around in this emulator is not working. So that should have flipped back to portrait, and I kind of knew that it wasn't going to. And I don't really know whose fault that is. But if you turn the device upside down, the application will kind of go upside down, and it was really kind of funny. So there's a couple of things to start with in tweaking the application. We don't want it to flip around, so maybe if we just make a setting so that everything will hold steady, stay in portrait mode, that would be an enhancement to the application. And we've got to fix these letters. It was confusing to him why we had 300s in the dialog boxes. And if you remember, I kind of put those 300s in there. Now it doesn't want to flip. I put those 300s in there so that they would be kind of placeholders, not so that the user would think that was a good score to start with. So I think we need to fix that. And when the user clicks the save button, we put this toast here, but we stayed on this screen. And it was kind of, the user was left with a, okay, well, now what? And it just wasn't obvious enough that once you've entered the score, and you probably have only one set of scores to enter, that you then have to go and click Show History to see what's going on in here. So what I think we should do is force the switch from one application to the other as soon as you save your information, your bowling scores, it should come over to the show history screen. We have the same issues over here. We have the characters are too light on this wood floor background. The headings and the numbers are not spaced well. I mean, to see that that's game 1, game 2, game 3, and then the series total, the average, and the running average, this isn't presenting itself very well. We've known this all along, but how much effort to put on any given task and what to leave to the finishing touches is, well, it's always up in the air. So let's just jump into these one by one, the ones that I can remember now that I've just said all of those. And I can tell you that I've spent a lot of time tweaking the interface, and each tweak is one small thing. So some of them I can't even remember exactly how I did it. And I think that there isn't a way to teach this. There is only a way to learn it by playing with it. So let's play with it a little bit, and then you're kind of on your own. Play with it some more, make changes and see what happens, and make changes and see what happens until you make an interface that you are proud to release to the App Store. Okay, so the first one that I want to do is in the Enter Scores activity. And this one, I'm starting with it because it's pretty easy and it's a big change. In the Save Click handler, we check to see if the data is valid. And if the data is valid, we put up a toast that says, "Thank you for entering your scores." And I'd like to do something else right here. I would like to switch to the other activity. So you remember how to do this? It's these two lines. We make an intent. This is how we handle the Show History button. So I'm going to say, just take those two lines and add them in here. And we have made that change. So maybe a comment here would be useful to whoever comes along. And I'm not going to test that because I already have, and you can test it and make sure that it works for you. So the next one is going to be in the manifest. Remember the manifest. And what is the easiest way to do this, I wonder? If we look in the XML, each activity you can specify a orientation. So I can say here that I want, for this activity, I want the screen orientation to be portrait. And that means it won't change, it won't jump around. So let's take that line and also put it in the history activity. Be very careful with these angle brackets. Man, oh man, that's a hard bug to find when you get the angle brackets messed up. Okay, so both of the activities, the history activity and the enter scores activity, are going to be forced to present themselves in portrait and stay in portrait regardless what the user does with the device. So let's run this and see if we have improved anything. So when I save, it goes automatically to the show history activity, and the only way to get from this activity back to the enter scores activity is to use the back button. I thought about adding a back button here, but the advice is don't do that. The Android users know the back button, and to get back to where you are, they should be using that button instead of a button that you put. And I could have put a button that says return to the enter scores activity or something like that, but the advice is not to. So what else did we change? We forced this to remain in portrait, so if I do this Control F11, the application is now not jumping around, and that's the impact that we wanted. Okay, let's make some more simple changes now. I'm going to change these to, instead of starting out at 300, I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to have them start out as 0. And the other thing that happens on the physical device, using the interface on the physical device is much easier than trying to use it on the PC screen, on the emulator. These things are just fine-tuned to automatically do what you would want them to do when you are using your fat fingers on the these user interface widgets. And I think that this 900, that automatically will go away. That text is not a calculated value. It will be calculated as soon as we run the application. Is that how it worked? Does anyone remember? So leaving the emulator running, it doesn't take very long to bring up the current version. Is that the current version? Yes, so I was wrong. That 900 has to go. And we want that to have an initial value of 0. Okay, well, I'm glad I did go and test that one. So now what I'd like to do is to fix the issue with the very light color of the text. And I can tell you that I played around with this for a long time trying to get one that I liked, and I'm not good at it, so I feel like I wasted a lot of time here. So I want to show you at least one way of trying to save a little bit of time when you're doing this kind of a design task. Over here under the resources, there is a way to add a style. So this is, if you're familiar with cascading style sheets, it works somewhat the same. We can apply a style to the various widgets, and then if we change the style, it will then go back and change all of the things that are using that style. So under values, I'm going to say new, other, and I want an Android XML file. And this one is going to be called styles.xml, and we can put as many styles in it as we want. The styles are named things. Okay, so now we've got styles, and in the resources we can add things here one by one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a style that is very, very small. Paste. So here's a style, and its name is dark text, and I just made up this number. This is red, green, and blue. So there's no green, there's a little red, and the blue number is quite high. So that's a hex number representing that color. So as your interfaces get more interesting, you will start to use these styles to save time. So let's save that and then go back over here and pick enter bowling scores and the properties of anything, well, where you would want to apply a style. It's really, really easy. So this dialog now has a style item and your styles will be listed here. So this is the style that we just made and we can apply it to that particular item. So we're going to go through these one by one and change the style to dark text. And you might say, well, if you're going to do them one by one, why didn't you just change the color of the color property of each of these? And the answer is because when we say we don't like that color, we don't want to go back and change the color property of every one of them. We just want to go and change the style. So let's go, and for each one of these, it doesn't take very long once you get going. Just make sure you're changing what you think you're changing, and we can make it look considerably better for the user so that they don't tip it upside down and there might be a faster way of doing this. And I'm going to change that one as well. Okay, does it feel better? I'm not really sure if it does or not, but at least when we're running it, it is much easier for the user to see that on the light background. And I think the important part of doing this is understanding how to create a style. Suppose we really wanted more blue. Change that to an even darker blue. Yeah, that one might be better. Then you get to play around with the color of your application, the colors used in your application, without having to go to each of the widgets. Well, I decided that series total doesn't stand out enough. When you enter the game scores, they are in these large things, and then you have this little tiny series total down here. So I decided that I wanted to change the text size of series total to something bigger, and I chose 20 density pixels, and that number there also to be larger, to be more prominent in the interface. 20 density pixels. That was an easy one. So we've been working on a screen that is 2.7 inches, and that's considered to be small, and it is possible that we could include small in our target market. And if we just start looking at this, suppose we went to a larger size screen, the interface looks a little bit nicer. You get rounded things automatically. These are kind of rounded, and it starts to feel a little bit better. We've got this empty space at the bottom now. I'm not sure that you want to deal with that or not. And suppose we went to a 10.1 inch tablet. What would happen here? Well, it seems to still be working. all of the information is up at the top, and that might not be how you would want to present this on a 10.1-inch tablet. But I'm not sure that people are carrying their 10.1-inch tablets to the bowling alley anyway. Here's a 5.1-inch screen. How did I do that? So maybe not great. Maybe we've cramped this up a little bit so that we could accommodate the absolute smallest of small screens. And you have to make some decisions there about whether this is an acceptable presentation and you can accommodate the small screens, or you need to eliminate the small screen user in the interest of making something that would be nicer for the majority of the users. And there's people who sit around talking about things like that all day. I tend not to be doing that. So maybe one of the things that's kind of new in this market is that people tend to deploy their apps in some sort of a free or a free beta version, and then just see what the users say. If people are interested in using this, they will be interested in saying what they think about it, and in particular what's wrong with it, what they think is wrong with it. And that's, well, it can be annoying, but it can also be very useful. If they're going to actually pay you 99 cents or whatever you're charging, then they have the right to say, look, this, I can't see the characters well enough, or it doesn't meet my needs for some other reason. Okay, now I want to work on the history view a little bit, the history layout, and I'm going to, these are the headers for the history layout, and I'm going to go and change their styles one by one, and there might be an easier way of doing this. So if I change the style to the only style that we have, the dark text, and then I'm going to take game 1, game 2, game 3, and I'm going to do 2 changes there. I'm going to change the style to our dark text style, but I'm going to change the text size. Now, I'm going to put 12 density pixels, and I'm going to make these a little bit smaller. And you can probably guess why I'm doing that, because it the headers kind of don't go over top of the, whoops, I forgot to change the style on that one. Okay, well, this is a little bit different from what I had rehearsed, but we'll just keep going and see what happens. This is kind of part of this game. I could have been using the text style, I suppose, instead of the style that allows me to change everything, but that's okay. So there's the series, and here's the average. And the running average. So these are a little bit smaller, and I want the numbers to kind of come out underneath the headings. It's not going to be perfect, but that's our objective. Now I'm going to jiggle things around a little bit in the history row, so I feel like I'm cheating a little bit here because there's a more interesting way of doing this. But jeepers, it's a question of how much effort to achieve how much improvement. So I have in the history row, I have a padding of 10 density pixels all around, and I don't want that on the left. So I'm going to delete it from there, and I'm going to say on the bottom and on the right and on the top, I'm going to put 10 density pixels. And this is quite the trial and error kind of process. In the bowling scores, remember that on this list view, we're adding one thing per list item. And the thing that we're adding is the toString from the bowling scores. So I'm just kind of cheating a little bit by jiggling this around. I'm adding some space after the third game. I increase this to, I think, 3 spaces, and then a couple of spaces here and a couple of spaces here to see what kind of a difference that will give us if the view will look better. And it kind of does. So the date is up against the left now, and the games are somewhat separated from the series average and the running average. Maybe I could have put another space in there and move these a little bit more under their headings. So after the third game, if I put 2 more spaces there and then just see if we gained anything in the appearance. So there are much more professional ways of doing this. So series average and running average tend to be a little bit more separated out, maybe an extra space after the date. And I feel like I've played with this maybe enough, and maybe I will go and break this into components and use an array adapter later on. I'm not sure if it's worth it to do that or not, to demonstrate using an array adapter. But for now, every one of you has the ability to go in there and play with this and make it look a little bit more like you would want it to look. Okay, it's time to start looking at making an icon or a bunch of icons for the app, and I'm going to bring your attention to this. In the dev guide, there is a section on how to design the icon for your app and the different kinds of icons that you have. So the launcher icon, this is the one that will appear on the device's screen, so the user will recognize your application by your launcher icon, and then a similar icon will appear in the dialogues. And the complicated thing about making an icon for Android is all of the various screen densities, and you want your icon to look right no matter which of the devices is being used. So they're very helpful with this. They give you a set of templates for creating your icon. So these templates are layered images, and you kind of pick and choose how you want yours to look. And it's kind of assumed in all of this documentation that you're using Photoshop, but you don't have to use Photoshop. You can use other applications that can open these layered images. And if you're a student and you don't have Photoshop and you can't afford to buy Photoshop, please don't steal it. You do have access to Expression Studio from Microsoft as a student through various academic programs, and you can use that to create your icon and save all of the different densities and so on. So I started playing around with the icon templates, and this is how you're advised to do it. So you have a bunch of different ones depending on whether it's for the launcher or for the menu or for a dialogue. And these PSD files, these are the Photoshop files which you can open and manipulate using the Expression Studio. Specifically, the product is Expression Design. So let me see where I am now. So what I did is I went out on the web and I found a picture of a bowling pin, and I found a whole bunch of them that I thought were related to bowling, and only one of them kind of met the criteria. In Android, the requirement is that for best practice, the icon is minimalist. So you don't have a whole lot of detail in the icon, and you have these shadows, which are really complicated if you're starting from scratch, but all of this shadowing is done for you in the documents that they provide. And it's supposed to be top lighted, so if there's a shadow in the icon, it appears on the bottom. Best advice here is don't go and steal people's graphics. They're very, very difficult to make, and if they want $50 for it, then you should pay them $50 for the use of it. I spent far, far too much time doing this, and it wasn't really all that much fun. But let me show you what I've come up with as the product. So when you actually ship an Android app, they need you to have a 512 by 512. So this is the recommendation, that you start with a 512 by 512 version of your icon, 512 pixels by 512 pixels, and that's kind of huge. And that's not the one that's going to be used in the launcher. This is used for purposes of marketing and so on. And in for the high density, there will be a dialogue and a launcher icon. So they specifically tell you how many pixels each of these should be. So this one is 72 by 72, and this one is 48 by 48. And then if you're doing the low density, you're going to see that the launcher is 36 by 36 and the dialogue is 24 by 24. So it's all the same image, but they are different sizes based on what they're going to be used for. So you take these assets, really the way that this happens is you make the 512 by 512 and then just start saving it, and save as and save as and save as. and using all of these different sizes, and the sizes are spelled out in the instructions. So there's a lot of them, but it's not as hard as it looks at first. So then we're going to take these assets, the icon assets, and put them into over here, the drawables. So under drawable HDPI, we have an icon PNG, but it's not the one that we want. This is the standard one that has the little Android guy. So if you hold on home, does that get us to all the applications? So this is the icon of the application right now. It's the default icon, which we absolutely don't want to be using. So I'm going to take the icons that we created and drop them into the right place, hopefully. Okay, the HDPI. Notice that I forgot to mention this. These different icons have the same names. There's nothing in the name of this file that says it is HDPI. So we need to have the same name so that when we say this is the name of the icon, then the system, the device that's running it, goes to the right folder and gets the file by that name that's appropriate for the device being used. I'm going to take these and drop them in here. I want a copy of those files to be put in there. Not enough screen real estate. Whoops. So I move the high density ones. Here are the low density ones. Copy them. Here are the medium density ones. And I'm going to drop them in MDPI. Now we have to tell we have to say a couple of things now. We have to make a couple of changes. We have to tell the application what the name of the icon is so that it will use it when it builds the APK. So let's go into the manifest file again. And let's see. Associated with the application, we have a drawable icon. I wonder if I should leave those there for now. And this is not what we want. Instead of drawable icon, we want to name the icon that we just put there, the one for the launcher, and we're going to say IC underscore my bowling scores. I think that's all. Let's see if running this application now okay, so here is the launcher icon for the My Bowling Scores application. So when I said that the icons should be minimalist, look at these other icons that are in here. I mean, this is a minimalist icon. There's almost nothing in it. It's a symbol that you easily recognize. All of these are easily recognized. This one has probably a little bit more stuff in it because there's kind of a scenery, a sunrise or whatever that is. This one would probably start to break their own rule that there is more busyness in it. But when you go to the App Store, there's a whole lot of people who ignore these requirements and their icons are really very, very busy. So there's someone launching our app, and the new way of looking at the scores. Now, when we click on this pop-up dialog should have an icon in it. And we've made them, so we might as well use them. So it makes it nicer that if you recognize that the dialog that's being presented to you is being presented from the app, not from the system, and that's kind of the purpose of putting a dialog icon there. So let's go to where we created the pop-up dialog and tell it that we want to use the new icon that we created. So in the history activity, try and remember what we were doing in here. Okay, verify delete row is a method that we use to pop up the dialog, and here's the builder pattern where we build the dialog, and we can say, okay, here's the message, and we can add one more thing to that. If we do a dot set icon, and it's going to be a drawable. So it's in our resources dot drawable dot, there it is, the icon dialog My Bowling Scores, and that should be all it takes to customize that dialog when it pops up to use our icon. So let's go back and try that. And here it is. So the hardest part of this really was to read the instructions on how to make the icon, the very first one, the 512 by 512, and then understand that you're going to change the properties of that 512 by 512 and just save it over and over and over with different properties so that you can drop them into these folders, the drawable, high density, low density, and medium density. I guess we can probably get rid of these guys now. I think that's a good idea. If something blows up, I want to know about it. So this icon PNG, if I throw those old ones away, the standard default ones, and then let's clean the project. Make sure that everybody is okay. I like to clear the console once in a while, just to make sure that I'm looking at new stuff. and now the application is started. So we have the icon there, and we have the launcher icon working here. So it seems to be using our new icon. So get into, if you feel like it. I mean, I guess you kind of have to do some of it yourself, unless you're going to hire a graphic designer to do the whole thing. But what I would probably do if I were seriously building a commercial app, or an app that I wanted to look really good for whatever reasons, I would hire someone to do the 512 by 512 and just tell them what I want. And that's what, there's a whole lot of freelance graphic designers out there who will make one of these for you. And unless that's your profession, it's going to take a whole long time to make an icon that even looks at all reasonable. So it's Expression Design, which is an application in the Microsoft Expression Studio. So you might know about Expression Web and some of the other applications that are in there. It's very useful. It's not as good in some ways. It doesn't have as many features as Photoshop, but I don't want that many features in a graphic design tool, because that's really not my job. Okay, well, let's take stock of where we are. Well, I wanted to make sure that this would run in other emulators, and I tried just making for fun a 3.0 emulator. I guess I made a 3.1 emulator, and this is API level 12, and when I ran it, it took up, the emulator took up more than all of the screen. So all I could see was the middle of the emulator, and it was impossible to work with. But it did run. I could see that it was there. So I'm trying now, going back to Android 2.2 and see if it would work on that emulator. And what I had to do for that was, in the manifest, change this to the min SDK of 8, which is 2.2, and automatically it would load the appropriate APIs for Android 2.2. And what you need to remember to do if you're going to rebuild the project with a different set of class libraries is make sure that you clean the project and get rid of all of the old class files that were compiled using the previous one, and then use run configurations just to make sure that you're running on the right thing. And now we're running on API level 8. And at first it will be a surprise that the data's not there. Well, there's only one record that I just entered a minute ago, but think of the emulators as an actual device. So the data, the database file, the SQLite database file, still is on your other emulator. And what's going on in this emulator is like having a fresh machine, a different. Let's put an error in here. Invalid bowling scores. Ooh, I could have changed that icon to our bowling pin icon, couldn't I? Well, there's a bug already. Good. Testing is good. So there's the toast, and it takes us over to this screen, and we have the and we can delete the data from the database. So things seem to be working over here. That's not an exhaustive test. That's kind of a check to see if 2.2 is working. Well, what else should we do by way of testing? We should test for different screen sizes within this one particular API level to make sure that if there are different manufacturers' screen densities and so on, that it still looks kind of reasonable. And you can do that in here in the layout by just changing this to various things. So for us, I think we've decided that so long as it's usable on these new large devices, and probably you should have an ideal target device and make it look perfect on that one, and then make it look acceptable on the other ones that are less common. And check each of the views, each of the activities in each of the screen sizes, and see if they still are making sense. I think of all of this tweaking of the GUI and now using styles, and the thing that I learned the most is that we really need to give the application to someone on a physical device and see what they do. And if you're on the floor laughing because it's just not doing anything that you expected it to do, that's kind of, I think, the more common reaction. We get so comfortable that they do what we want them to do in our development environment that we kind of forget that, well, the first thing that they're going to do is completely unexpected. So in this video we tweaked the GUI, and we made icons, application icons and dialog icons, and we tested on some virtual devices, and you have to believe me that I did some user testing to see if this was going to work. And really, I think if it's acceptable, if we're ready to put our name on it and show it publicly, then the only thing that we have to do now is to figure out the deployment to the App Store issues and put it out there and see what happens. See you next time.